Welcome back, guys, to another episode of the podcast yet to be named. If you have any name ideas, let us know in the comment section below. I'm Johnny, here with Andrew. Andrew, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good.
In this episode today, we are going to be covering a crazy camp going on in Houston for players who weren't maybe exposed to colleges or didn't get that opportunity, whether they were too small, too slow, or whatever. I found it to be an awesome story this morning when I was researching for this podcast. Old Dominion, Southern Miss, and Marshall are leaving the Conference USA, and what that means for their athletes, what that means for tournaments, off seasons for winter and spring sports, and why there's some consequences that athletes are taking on that maybe they shouldn't be taking on. And then we're going to be moving into college basketball, talking about some teams with huge weeks that are on the bubble and what they need to do, along with some other college basketball stuff going on. And finishing off talking about the USFL draft, what we know, what to keep an eye on, and what the big names are in the draft. So stay tuned. We got an awesome episode. We're going to try to get in and out of here relatively quickly, not hold you guys for a super long thing. So I'm going to get right into it. So I came across this story on The Athletic this morning about a camp down in Houston for under the radar recruits that happens after National Signing Day. One of the reasons for this camp is whether these players were too small or too slow, they get this opportunity to get in front of D2, NAIA schools, and D3 schools because those signing periods start February 2nd and go through August. It's this great second chance, kind of last opportunity for these players. Over 1,400 campers have received scholarships worth $140 million, so it's working for these kids. This camp started back in 2009. One of the best things about it is it's free but you need to meet a 2.5 GPA as well as the important SAT and ACT scores, because you don't take opportunities away from players who really need this opportunity, that have the grades, the test scores to make it for these coaches. After the camp goes down, it turns into a college football kind of job search type of way, where there's booths set up for all these schools. A lot of these players end up getting scholarship offers right on the spot, and it creates this opportunity. Now, this isn't just players who are D2, NAIA, or D3 players. Some of these players have offers as preferred walk-ons for Division I schools, but are not getting any money. And a lot of these campers are on the lunch programs at their college or at their high schools. So having this free camp and earning a scholarship is important for them, whether they have a D1 opportunity or not. Just getting that scholarship money in can be huge for them to continue their education, whether that leads to playing in the NFL one day or getting great career opportunities. A lot of people have gone on to become doctors, successful businessmen, just overall success due to these camps. And former campers who went through this camp are now coming back to be counselors. So it's an awesome thing. It's a mix of Houston area coaches along with some NFL alumni. And one of the cool things about it is this has led to multiple states and multiple areas in Texas launching their own camps to help out these campers. It's an awesome thing. It's one of those things where just because a player is trying to play college football doesn't mean they're guaranteed for an NFL spot. It's college in general. So it's just awesome to be reminded of getting people free education down the road. Andrew, what's your opinion on this whole thing?
I think it's great. It does keep in mind the spirit of like what they're going for at the end of the day, which is going to college, which is something a lot of times gets pushed to the wayside when athletics enter the situation. So that's great to hear that they are putting a focus on that. And it's just great to be able to like get that second chance in general. Not everybody is this player, but there are the Isaiah Thomases of the world who don't get drafted until the last pick of the NBA draft, but then all of a sudden is the starter for the Sacramento Kings that year and turns into a future all-star. Not every kid who gets an opportunity from these camps will be that player, but even if one or two of them are, this camp can find itself really, really successful by finding that and just in general helping kids to be able to achieve the dream of going and playing at college or just even going to college in general.
And one other thing is some of these times that we've seen a trickle down effect, whether that's due to the ongoing pandemic, the transfer portal, or other things going on in college football. Players that might have been FCS products are now becoming D2 products. D2 players are becoming NAIA or D3 prospects. So just having this opportunity to get that last chance to earn that scholarship, because maybe they were overlooked because the way people are constructing rosters is so different. So that's one of the positive stories I want to share on the podcast today. As much as I'm for the transfer portal, it's unfortunate that high school seniors are being the ones affected by this, especially when you add on what is going on in the world and some of these players losing their junior seasons, not having the full film when the junior season is viewed as one of the most important seasons for recruitment. And maybe these guys were late bloomers. Just to get that opportunity is just an amazing thing. Now moving over to the Conference USA, Marshall, Southern Miss, and Old Dominion had been planning to join the Sun Belt, and it was originally thought they were going to join next year. But with James Madison entering the picture and joining this year, those three schools wanted to jump to the Sun Belt as well to start competing for the Sun Belt championships and stuff like that, and announced that at the end of the academic year, they will be officially making the move to the Sun Belt from the Conference USA. Now, the Conference USA is not super happy about this and kind of refused to offer a solution to when these schools decide, no, we're leaving this year. Let's figure out a resolution that benefits both us and you. And one of the things they decided to just do is put postseason bans on some winter sports as well as some spring sports. And while that sounds like, oh, well, I guess that's a good penalty, when you really think about it, the schools, yes, they might be affected financially by not being able to play in these tournaments, but the players you got to think about, what about these seniors? They're not even going to get to play in the Sun Belt Conference. And all of a sudden, their last ride, most of these players aren't going to go on to play basketball after the season. You're just going to say, no, you're not going to get that opportunity for the postseason. Andrew, what's your opinion on this?
I hate it too. I agree that, it doesn't feel like a necessary punishment. You're hurting players who aren't making a decision. These are schools making this decision to better themselves, not players choosing to leave. Players are sticking to their school. So it feels very unnecessary to hurt them. I also think just in general, for certain sports, it hurts the integrity of the playoffs of those sports, because I know we didn't fully talk about it. We're mostly talking about Conference USA, but the Colonial Athletic Association, they aren't allowing James Madison to participate in their basketball conference tournament this year. And while they aren't currently leading the CAA, they did have an upset against Virginia and have proven to be at times a good team this year. So they had a team that legitimately could have made an upset and gotten their way into March. So for them to not even have that opportunity to try feels like it kind of stains what March is or what March could be for the Colonial Athletic Association. So then when you transfer it over into the into CUSA and seeing, these teams and these schools not getting an opportunity, it is a huge, huge, huge shame,
And I mean, these are also players that just a few years ago might have lost out on another opportunity to go to March Madness when the events of 2020 caused the cancellation of the March Madness tournament. So you're taking away opportunities then, and now you're taking more opportunities. The players were not the people in the boardrooms deciding, hey, we should go to the Sun Belt and we will benefit financially the most if we leave now. That, like we mentioned before starting to record, a fine might have been a little more understandable. These television contracts aren't as big as other conferences. And I mean, these schools had to make these decisions now or get left in the dust to change conference. I get that. But at the same time, if the NCAA is for the athlete and the betterment of these athletes, then why aren't they stepping in and saying, hey, you can't put a postseason ban because you're taking away these opportunities from these players. It's not like these schools are dealing with academic issues or violations at all. These are players who have played their career, did not transfer, stayed, and just want an opportunity to play in March or in their conference tournaments. And you're just taking away that opportunity, and it's just an unfortunate event. Do you have any final opinions on this topic to close out before we move on to college basketball?
I just think it's something that conferences should think about a little bit harder. I understand the idea of a punishment, and a harsh punishment is to dissuade teams from leaving and ultimately hurting the conference. I understand where they are coming from, but I do think at some point you need to look at the bigger picture and think about what the unintended consequences are of your punishments.
This just secures that we already knew this beforehand, but as much as the NCAA spews we're not about business or this and that, and the conferences spew we're here for the betterment of the athlete, it really shuts the door and says, no, we are a business first, college sports second, because you can't leave. You signed a contract. And these schools did sign contracts through next year and agreed originally before they made the switch that they were going to play for Conference USA. And it's just an unfortunate thing that the schools will get over it. They'll get the financial benefits down the road. The athletes are the only ones who really lose out in all this situation. So speaking of college basketball, Andrew, some teams on the bubble have some tough weeks ahead. And why don't you share that information with us?
Yeah, so there's 4 teams in particular that I'd want to talk about this week that they just have absolutely massive weeks that they in a sense need to win right now. The first one, I'm going to start off with the ACC with Virginia. They're currently on a 4-game win streak. 2 of those games, including against Miami and at Duke, which are huge, huge wins. And those 2 wins alone put Virginia in the position to potentially make March. So they're currently tied for 5th in the conference for Wake Forest in the ACC. Their conference record is 10-5. So this also would be a very influential week for who would get that second bye in the conference tournament. And as of yesterday, Sunday, Lunardi had Virginia in the next 4 out category. So they were teams 5 through 8 that just barely missed the tournament. Tonight, Monday, this game will be done by the time this podcast comes out, but they have to play at Virginia Tech, who is starting to heat up. They just beat Syracuse and kind of put Syracuse's hopes to rest. So that's never going to be an easy game. It's a big rivalry game. And then they have to go to at Miami again on Saturday. So it's just going to be a huge, huge week for them against some of the top teams and some of the hot teams. And at the end of the day, if they don't win now, there will be more chances where they get to play at Duke at home. And then they will be playing against Florida State as well. But the only other game is against Louisville, and that's a must-win game, not a game that you want to win. So games like the Miami and the Virginia Tech game are games that you really want to win to build your resume as opposed to just having it destroy your resume. The next team I want to move on to is Rutgers. They have now beaten 3 top 25 teams in a row. Based off of last week's rankings, they beat 13 Michigan State, 16 Ohio State, and 14 Wisconsin. Michigan State and Ohio State were both at home, and Wisconsin was on the road in Madison. They're currently sitting 6th in the Big Ten with a record of 9-5 in conference play. Lunardi also has them in the next 4 out portion of his bracketology. And they have just an absolutely monster week this week. They have to play against Illinois, and then they have to travel to West Lafayette to play Purdue. They already beat Purdue earlier, but that was at the RAC, and it's so much easier for Rutgers to win at the RAC than it is for anybody to win at Mackey Arena. It's just insanely hard to play there. So these are 2 of their biggest games left. So they don't have too many opportunities after this week to improve their resume. The only other improve their resume game would be a game at home against Wisconsin. So if they really want to try to solidify them making the tournament for certain, they have to win at least one of those games and then not lose games to teams that they shouldn't throughout the rest of the year.
I mean, the interesting thing for Rutgers is the fact that they have built this resume up and are still sitting on the edge of March Madness. It's kind of one of those crazy things, and the rack is one of the craziest places to go in and play at. And I am completely terrified as a Wisconsin Badger fan about the Badgers going into the rack. I was there when Wisconsin lost to them, and they were like the 1 or 2 ranked team in the nation 7 or 8 years back when Kaminsky and Decker were out of the game, and just devastating memories of Wisconsin playing at the rack.
Yeah, I do. I personally think that the Scarlet Knights will beat the Badgers for a second time this season when they visit. But no, yeah, I mean, they have really good players, and their clear-cut X factor is Ron Harper Jr. If he scores 20 points or more, there's only been like one game, I believe, that they've lost this year when Harper Jr. goes off for at least 20. So if they can find a way to get good production from guys like Geo Baker and Paul Mulcahy, like they did against Wisconsin, they can beat almost anybody. So, and it's not like they were getting easy looks either. Almost every single shot that was taken that game had a hand in their face, and they still knocked down shots. So Rutgers is a good team and a team to fear. Nobody wants to see them on the first weekend.
There was some social media stuff posted that if March Madness games took place at the rack and only the rack, the Rutgers would have multiple national championships to their name just because it's one of those arenas now. But the question I have for you, let's say Rutgers loses 2 out of 3 of these big resume building games. How do they make it into the tournament from there?
So first of all, I think if they lose 2 out of 3, it still means they won 1 out of the 3. So I think that alone will push them in. But if they were to lose all 3 of them somehow, I think at that point, their only hope is to have other teams lose ahead of them, because the only reason Rutgers isn't in it right now is because of a few really bad non-conference losses. That's the only thing truly holding them back. That, and partly the expectations that people had set on the Scarlet Knights this year, because they haven't performed that terrible to what they were expected to. In conference play, they're even, they have a record similar to what a lot of people expected them to, and they're currently sitting 6th, which is a place that might even be higher than what some people placed them. So I think that realistically, if they can even just win one of them, they'll be in. But other than that, they kind of have to hope that some of these other bubble teams that I'm talking about and other ones that we won't have talked about today just are dropping games.
This is a joke right here. No one take this serious, but I just wanted to make this joke. It just came to mind. And Rutgers shouldn't leave it up to the committee because based off of the past, the committee does not like putting New Jersey teams into March Madness, even when they deserve it. Monmouth.
Fair enough. But yeah, so moving on to the next team, Iowa State right now, and they're in huge, huge danger. So they're currently dead last in the Big 12 at 3-9. Take that as you will. I look at it as somebody in the Big 12 had to be last. The fact that it happened to be Iowa State has no reflection on who they are as a team, because they're a much better team than anybody could have ever expected out of them. Lunardi has them currently in the last 4 in, so a little bit higher than Rutgers or Virginia. And they play at TCU and against Oklahoma this week. Both of those 2 teams are safer in the tournament than Iowa State is. And neither of them are at the top of the conference, but it's just so difficult to win games in the Big 12 that Iowa State needs to start playing with a sense of urgency and building momentum right now so that when they go into the conference tournament, they could pick up a win maybe and just reinforce to the committee that they deserve to be in. Just because they have, they're in the bottom of half of their conference doesn't mean anything. it just means that they're in a very good conference. Then finally, the last team on the bubble that I want to talk about is Oregon. They'll just have to be really solid this week. They also don't have the hardest schedule right now. They play Washington State tonight, Monday, or I guess yesterday, Monday for you guys. And then they have to play at Arizona State and at Arizona. Arizona is obviously the top dog in the Pac-12, but Arizona State, is one of the only arguably bad teams or subpar teams that Oregon has to play yet. So just going back, they're currently tied for third in the Pac-12 at 9-4 with UCLA, and Lunardi has them in the first four out. So the big thing is that Oregon cannot lose at Arizona State. They just simply cannot, because they have such an incredibly hard schedule coming up with the Southern California schools and the Washington schools after they visit the Arizona schools, that they aren't going to have the opportunity to get easy wins again. So they need to find a way to beat Arizona State and then just take, maybe steal a game or two from some of those other teams. Those are the big bubble watch teams that have big weeks or important weeks right now.
So
Johnny.
Sorry to interrupt you, but sitting currently right now, of those four teams you just mentioned, who is the most likely of the four teams to make the tournament, and who would you say has the lowest chances with resume and what they have left to build off of?
I think, I don't know who I would say first and who I would say last. I definitely like Rutgers and Oregon's odds better than Iowa State's and Virginia's. If I was forced to pick, I think that the committee will do right and will put Rutgers in, especially just because of how difficult the Big 12 or the Big 10 is. And I think that at the end of the day, the committee will put Iowa State in just because of how good they've been and how surprising they've been. So that means that, unfortunately for Virginia, a team that has seen so much success recently, will finally find the season that they missed the tournament post national championship. So I think the best ones right now are Rutgers, just because it's hard to beat top 25 teams in a row and be this hot and miss. And while Virginia might be kind of hot, they have very losable games in a very underwhelming conference. So
moving on to some of the,
I was about to ask you what your opinion was on that.
My opinion on this, from what I've watched, is I'm going to go with more of the casual fan of the teams I want to see make the tournament versus the teams I wouldn't lose sleep over. Being from Jersey, growing up watching Rutgers in the Big East and the American and now in the Big Ten, as much as I root for the Badgers more than Rutgers, because that's where I spent 4 years and ended up with a degree. It's being used as a camera stand right now. Go check out my social media for behind the scenes looks at J.R. O'Brien, JROBRIEN. I put a great photo up there that I sent to Andrew before we started recording. But I'd like to see Rutgers make the tournament, and just having friends with family members going to Oregon, it'd be nice to see the Ducks in the tournament. I don't really have any connection to Virginia or Iowa State, other than the only connection I have with Iowa State is Hannah, one of the volleyball players I interviewed over the summer. They'd go to Iowa State, so I would root for them for her. But right now, if I had to choose two of the four, it'd be Rutgers and Oregon in that order.
Yeah. So then there's two teams I was going to talk about that they're not on the bubble, but they do have some big weeks when it comes to seeding this week. The first team is Kentucky. They're on a 3-game win streak, and this alone has put them in position to be a 1 seed. Them and Auburn are punching back and forth at each other. They're currently second in the SEC, only at 1 game behind Auburn. So Kentucky is sitting at 10-2 conference record. And this week they play at Tennessee and at home against Alabama. And, this is just a huge week for them in terms of that 1 line versus that 2 line. because these will be some of the hardest games they have outside of the SEC tournament left. Earlier in the year, they just absolutely nuked Tennessee. So it's hard to expect that Tennessee won't come out swinging against them. And Alabama is really looking for more stability going into the SEC tournament. You know, they've been one of those teams that will lose to the worst teams and beat the best teams. So I wouldn't be fully shocked to see them come out and punch the Wildcats right in the mouth out the gate, and it's going to be on Kentucky to respond. Then the only other team I'd like to talk about for, tournament watch would be Houston. They finally dropped a game in conference play this past week. They actually lost 2 games to SMU and Memphis. And this was just bound to happen at some point because of how many injuries the Cougars have faced. But it's unfortunate that they had to lose 2 of them in the same week. Now it's just about bouncing back and trying to really solidify a decent seed for them to make their path easier, especially due to how many injuries they have. They are currently sitting at a 4 seed, and they're not very safely in that spot, but that's what they got to work with. And they have some opportunities this week for both wins or losses that, any loss isn't going to look great on them at this point, but, they play an above average UCF team. And they play at a below average, at least for the standards of this program, below average Wichita State team. So these will be 2 big weeks to watch for some of the higher up teams, but there's always going to be a lot of shuffling. Like this past week, almost every top 25 team seemed to drop a game. So it'll be interesting to see how teams do and what they do for their resume this week.
Of the 2 teams you just talked about, who do you think improves their seeding the most over the next closing out weeks going into conference tournament week?
I mean, it's hard for Houston to improve their seeding too much. They have another opportunity against SMU, who I think deserves to be in the tournament, and they'll have opportunities to play in the AAC tournament. But I think the only way they can really improve their seed is by winning out and having other teams lose. So I think, honestly, Kentucky is the only one of those 2 that has the future in their hands in terms of moving up.
And moving on to your top 25 and comparing it to the AP poll that just got released.
Yes.
As of the time of recording.
I'm going to just kind of run through my top 25, and then I'm going to, make some highlights on who I think, interesting things between the 2. So mine, I have Arizona first, Gonzaga second, Kentucky, Auburn, Providence, 6 through 10, Texas Tech, Purdue, Kansas, Duke, Illinois. 11 through 15 is Villanova, Wisconsin, Michigan State, Ohio State, and Wyoming. 16 through 20 is Houston, Baylor, Arkansas, Rutgers, and Tennessee. And then the bottom 5 are Notre Dame, Colorado State, SMU, Texas, and UCLA. First thing I will say is that my top 25s throughout the entire year have been a lot more in favor of mid-major teams. It was actually really hard for me to leave Boise State out of it, but dropping 2 games recently, I had to put them just knocking on the door. But yeah, some things from the AP poll that I saw that were very interesting this week. Providence finally got some respect getting a top 10. I don't know how much of that is the AP poll voters saying that Providence deserves it versus they just haven't lost and other teams have, but they finally got some respect at 8. Wyoming finally got in, which I think a lot of people, they might legitimately be America's team once we hit March. They could be a big, big Cinderella. So Wyoming got ranked 22nd for the first time this year. 2 teams that didn't get ranked that I was a little bit upset with. I wasn't fully upset with SMU not getting ranked, but I think they deserve to be. But one team I was actively upset with not being ranked was Rutgers. They've won 3 giant games in a row. And I know that the AP poll, they argue about if it's a snapshot in time versus the best 25 players, but they typically try to argue that they are a snapshot in time. And right now, if you look in time and you look at the past 3 games for every team in the nation, it's hard to say that Rutgers doesn't deserve to be near the top even. I have them 19th because I'm also taking into account what happened throughout the year. But with them beating so many good teams in a row in difficult situations, Rutgers deserves to be ranked. It's, to me, quite frankly, ridiculous that they only got 10 votes. Just looking at it, teams that they beat: Michigan State, 485 votes, or Ohio State, 503 votes, Wisconsin, 631 votes. I get that it's different because the voting system works in a way where the higher up you get, the more one vote kind of weighs, like a vote for number one is actually equal to 25 votes, not one vote. But it's still kind of ridiculous that Rutgers only got 10 votes. The last team I wanted to talk about was UCLA and USC. So the AP poll, they only moved UCLA down one spot, moved USC up a few spots, basically saying that they think that it wasn't a bad loss for UCLA. It was just a good win for USC. I think it was truly the other way around. I had UCLA 15th and just dropped the floor on them to put them 25th. I was considering, like I said, I was thinking about putting Boise State 25th or a handful of other teams. But, I don't think that we can still. UCLA has been really, really struggling. And if you look at it as the snapshot in time with the losses to the Arizona schools and loss to USC now, I think you need to start being a little bit wary of where their heads are going into March.
And now I just close this out. I want to talk about the USFL draft, which is coming up next week, February 22nd. Fortunately, I don't think we're going to be able to watch it. I think it's kind of being done in secret. Not secret, but like out of the public. But from what we know, and this comes from AmericanFootballInternational.com, is similar to the XFL draft. The USFL draft will be a snake format for each phase, in which the draft order reversed in each round. The draft was shuffled for each phase as a predetermined through lotteries. A draft pool of over 3,000 eligible players will be available for the USFL coaches. Phase 1 will be quarterback selections. Phase 2 will be offensive skill positions, other quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. That's going to be 10 rounds, followed by Phase 3, which will be offensive linemen, offensive tackles, guards, and centers, which will be 10 rounds, followed by Phase 4, which is defensive front 7 players, defensive linemen, and linebackers, another 10-round system. Phase 5 will be defensive backs, cornerbacks, and safeties, 10 rounds. And then Phase 6 will be open draft, any position, which is going to be 30 rounds. Special teams players, including long snappers, punters, and place kickers, have no separate position phase and are relegated to the open pool. The player pool is made up of over 30,000. The player pool is made up of over 3,000 players, and people have come out and said that there will be 5 or 6 high-profile players that are instantly recognizable on each roster, according to XFL Newsroom. And in a new twist, the USFL could dip into the college football pool earlier than the NFL, signing underclassmen wishing to go pro. The league will allow any player to be eligible if they graduated from high school in 2020 or earlier. This is untraditional thinking, is something to keep an eye on come draft night, especially when the NCAA's transfer portal is filled with over 1,500 people. Now, this was something that when the transfer portal was really blowing up, people were talking about a lot, and it's kind of died down. But it'll be really interesting to see with so many players in the transfer portal, not everybody can get scholarship opportunities. And just because you enter the transfer portal doesn't mean you're going to find a new home. And if you're pushed into the transfer portal and you can't find a new home because coaches want the roster spot, this is another opportunity for players. And although people are going to say, well, the XFL failed, failed because of the events of 2020. They were actually doing very well during the time period before everything collapsed. The St. Louis Battlehawks were about to open the second level of their dome, and it was projected to be sold out. I was actually going to try to get tickets to that game. Unfortunately, the global bastard kind of came in and said, no, you're not. And the AAF did fail, and that's because of some controversial stuff of the guy who ended up spending money to kind of save the league, saying, I don't really want to save the league anymore. So the USFL is going to be an interesting thing to watch. Back when the USFL first came around, it did have a lot of success in the spring before they decided to push it to try to compete with the NFL in the fall. Keep an eye out on my US history of the USFL video coming out this week. I'm going to try to get it out tonight, the night this podcast gets released, but it might not. It might be a bigger project. I'm really excited for the USFL. It covers that gap of April onward of when all of us just want football in our lives. And the USFL and XFL might be able to work together in the long run, because the XFL would probably run February to April come next year, followed by the USFL from April to the middle of July or end of July. And then you have the Canadian Football League throughout the summer, followed by the NFL and college football returning. So we might have a full calendar year of football. Some may say, well, that's going to dilute their product. I see it as opportunities for other players. I love watching FCS football, just seeing guys you really don't hear a lot about compete in their playoff system. I love their playoff system. I love everything football. This is a football channel. It started off as an XFL channel before moving to a college football channel. So I'm excited to talk about this content throughout the next few months. Andrew, I know you don't have a full opinion on the USFL, but based off of the idea of players from the transfer portal being able to possibly play in this league if they graduated from high school before 2020, do you think that's a good thing, or do you think that's a bad thing?
I think it could be either, just because, like you said, I don't have the full idea of what they are. So I think it depends on who they would be playing against, because football is one of those sports where it truly is a grown man sport, where, there are select players, but there are a few players in like the world of basketball or baseball where if you just kind of dropped them in the professionals, they wouldn't be as dominant as they would be, but they could handle themselves. A sport that's so physical like football, if you're playing against grown men that, you could almost really seriously risk injuring yourself and almost ending your career. So I'm certain there's a small handful of players that this would be amazing for. But it's just about, I think I could make the argument that it is a good thing as long as everybody has the correct guidance and, teams won't just accept anybody. If they, are honest with kids and say, hey, unfortunately, we'd love to have your talents that you bring, but we don't want to destroy your career by letting you play for us and just letting you just get absolutely injured in the ugliest way possible.
Yeah, what graduating class of 2020 from high school, that put these players around 19, 20 years old. And yes, the USFL, to my understanding, is going to try to be a younger league. You still have the possibility of playing against a dude who's 33, 34 years old, and you're 19 or 20. It's a pretty big gap. I mean, rookies don't usually go out and dominate. There are a few every once in a while, but it's very different positions. I think you do bring up important concern of player safety. I think for guys like Kenny Robinson with the XFL, who ended up building his draft stock after some school issues led to him being forced to leave West Virginia and just having that last opportunity. He was going to be, I think, a junior or senior that year anyways. So he still was older. It wasn't the class of 2020. It's still something that's a great opportunity for players that maybe got pushed out. The USFL, I think, is going to have some educational programs to help players who haven't finished their degree finish their degrees as well as some of their workers. It's kind of looking like a positive environment from what I've seen and what we've learned so far. And that goes along with their salary. They're paying guys relatively comparable to what the CFL and what the XFL paid their players. If you're in training camp, you make $600 per week. Practice squad members, $1,500 per week. Active rosters, $4,500 per week. And then there's going to be victory bonuses. It's going to be 38-player active roster, 7-person practice squad. And it's something that like I said, I'm super excited to watch. I'm super excited for more information. The draft is going to be next Tuesday. So unfortunately, unless we decide to push the podcast back to Wednesday to be able to cover that, we're not going to be able to cover it specifically on this show. But I do have planned videos of talking about some of the bigger name players that end up getting drafted next week on the channel. So stay tuned for that. I am all for more football. Give me more football. I always go through withdrawal from not having football on TV between the months of March through the start of the college football season in the last week of August. Andrew, is there any last minute news stories you want to share?
No, but I do want to comment on one thing you said when talking about this. I remember you mentioning how some people will make the argument that the additions to these leagues and having a full year of football will dilute the product. In my mind, I think that's just not true, because you're going to have people who are only dedicated to the NFL. But those who aren't only dedicated to the NFL are the people who can watch a different football game every single day of the year and never once get bored of it. I do it with basketball and baseball. I get that I switched sports at one point, at one point in the year, but I could legitimately watch a game every single day of the year for one of those sports and not feel like I'm losing anything or that there's anything lost of the sport. So I think that that argument shouldn't really exist. I think that there are some people that won't be dedicated enough to watch everything, and that there will be other people that will eat up every single bit of football content that they can get, such as you, Johnny. So I think that, at the end of the day, this having more programming and more sports can only be a good thing.
The XFL was so fun to watch, in my opinion, during its time period of when I was still in school, getting out of class, going to the weekend, and then turning on the games and just having football on the TV, whether I was fully focused into it or just having it in the background while I was doing homework. Just full stadiums. Football fans are some of the craziest fans you will see. And I mean, there's even rumors that with The Rock being at the Super Bowl and all he's done connected with the NFL, that the XFL and NFL might have a working relationship come the time the XFL comes around next year. I think creating more opportunities for players that either didn't get a full opportunity in college or went under the radar in high school and led to them playing at lesser colleges and being overlooked come NFL draft time, to then have this opportunity with the USFL or XFL brings amazing stories that I'm excited to dive into and look into and share with you guys. Granted, I'm a little biased because this is a football channel for the most part, but there's nothing to complain about having more football. If you don't like the idea of it, don't watch it. No one's saying, oh, you have to watch it if you watch any football. Don't watch it. No one's going to really, you're not going to have something to complain about, and you're not going to lose any sleep. And none of us are going to lose any sleep if you're not watching the USFL. So I think that's all I have to say. I'm excited to have the NFL have minor league systems in a way, not playing during the season. The one concern if the minor league system like this does happen is these players either going straight out of a regular season into a spring league or straight from a spring league into an NFL season, and injury concerns around that. But none of that's guaranteed right now, and you really didn't see any of those issues with XFL players coming into the NFL. Guys like Taylor Heineke, PJ Walker, Kenny Robinson, names that have done well in the NFL so far. Names we would have never heard of in the NFL had it not been for the XFL in 2020. That's all I got. Guys, thank you so much for watching. We are having a blast creating these for you guys. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Let us know what topics you want us to talk more about in this podcast. And as always, remember to embrace the grind.